Hi, welcome to Tell Us We're Wrong, a comedy show about philosophy. They say that comedians are modern philosophers. Well, we'll put that to the test. This week's episode, I have my guests, Jason Green and John Cuellar, very funny comedians. I think that you will enjoy them as much as I do. That sounds weird. This week's topic is moral luck. Does society see you as an immoral person if you just happen to have a string or run of bad luck? I know this is a long form show. Grab some popcorn, eat a snack. If you have sex during the show, put it in the comments. I won't judge you. Now, if for any reason we go above your heads, please leave a message. Tell us if we're doing it too hard. In order for me to continue to make this show, I need you to like and subscribe and enjoy the show. I started this show because I couldn't afford to go to college.
Can't believe that good or bad luck should influence neither our moral judgment of a person and his actions, nor his moral assessment of himself. The good will is not good because of what it effects or accomplishes, or because of its adequacy to achieve some proposed end. It is good only because of its willing, i.e., it is good of itself. And, regarded for itself, it is to be esteemed incomparably higher than anything which could be brought about by it in favor of any inclination, or even of the sum total of all inclinations. Even if it should happen that, by a particularly unfortunate fate, or by the niggardly provision of a stepmotherly nature, this will should be wholly lacking in power to accomplish its purpose, and if even the greatest effort should not avail it to achieve anything of its end, and if there remained only the goodwill, not as a mere wish, but as the summoning of all the means in our power, it would sparkle like a jewel in its own right, as something that has its full worth in itself. Usefulness or fruitlessness can neither diminish nor augment this worth. He would presumably have said the same about a bad will. Whether it accomplishes its evil purposes is morally irrelevant, and a course of action that would be condemned if it had a bad outcome cannot be vindicated if by luck it turns out well. There cannot be moral risk. This view seems to be wrong, but it arises in response to a fundamental problem about moral responsibility to which we possess no satisfactory solution. The problem develops out of the ordinary conditions of moral judgment. Prior to reflection, it is intuitively plausible that people cannot be morally assessed for what is not their fault, or for what is due to factors beyond their control. Such judgment is different from the evaluation of something as a good or bad thing, or state of affairs. The latter may be present in addition to moral judgment, but when we blame something for his actions, we are not merely saying it is bad that they happen, or bad that he exists. We are judging him, saying he is bad, which is different from his being a bad thing. This kind of judgment takes only a certain kind of object. Without being able to explain exactly why, we feel that the appropriateness of moral assessment is easily undermined by the discovery that the act or attribute, no matter how good or bad, is not under the person's control. All other evaluations remain. This one seems to lose its footing. So a clear absence of control, produced by involuntary movement, physical force, or ignorance of the circumstances, excuses what is done from moral judgment. But what we do depends in many more ways than these on what is not under our control, what is not produced by a good or a bad will, in Kant's phrase. And external influences in this broader range are not usually thought to excuse what is done from moral judgment, positive or negative. Let me give a few examples, beginning with the type of case Kant has in mind. Whether we succeed or fail in what we try to do nearly always depends to some extent on factors beyond our control. This is true of murder, altruism, revolution, the sacrifice of certain interests, for the sake of others, almost any morally important act. What has been done, and what is morally judged, is partly determined by external factors. However jewel-like the goodwill may be in its own right, there is a morally significant difference between rescuing someone from a burning building and dropping him from a 12th-story window while trying to rescue him. Similarly, there is a morally significant difference between reckless driving and manslaughter. And whether a reckless driver hits a pedestrian depends on the presence of the pedestrian at the point where he recklessly passes a red light. What we do is also limited by the opportunities and choices with which we are faced, and these are largely determined by factors beyond our control. Someone who was an officer in a concentration camp might have led a quiet and harmless life if the Nazis had never come to power in Germany. And someone who led a quiet and harmless life in Argentina might have become an officer in a concentration camp if he had not left Germany for business reasons in 1930. I shall say more later about these and other examples. I introduced them here to illustrate a general point, where a significant aspect of what someone does depends on factors beyond his control, yet we continue to treat him in that respect as an object of moral judgment. It can be called moral luck. Such luck can be good or bad. And the problem posed by this phenomenon, which led Kant to deny its possibility, is that the broad range of external influences here identified seems on close examination to undermine moral assessment, as surely as does the narrower range of familiar excusing conditions. If the condition of control is consistently applied, it threatens to erode most of the moral assessments we find it natural to make. The things for which people are morally judged are determined in more ways than we at first realize by what is beyond their control. And when the seemingly natural requirement of fault or responsibility is applied in light of these facts, it leaves few pre-reflective moral judgments intact. Ultimately, nothing or almost nothing about what a person does seems to be under his control.
It's nice to have you here with us, John.
Thank you
for joining us, and I'm happy to have you.
I'm happy to be here.
Jason's second time. So this one is about what?
Yeah.
Anybody want to tackle this one first?
Well, because I'm much stupider than Jason, I would like to try and throw out my my opinion there first. I think that what we have here is an argument against Kant's assessment that goodwill, you know, in itself is its own thing. It's kind of its own definition, and you know, you can basically say that, you know, as long as you want to do good, there's a desire for a positive outcome, to put some sort of positive action in place, something that you can do, well-intended and actions included. I think that what this paper is saying is that, you know, that's kind of bullshit, because who we are and what we strive for is already shaped by external forces, you know, history, environment, where we're placed at in that particular moment in time and in the world. So, you know, while Kant's saying, hey, as long as you mean good and you want to do good, that's kind of cool. You know, he's saying, hey, if you want to do evil, you know, you might be an asshole. I don't know. But either way, you know, the paper is basically saying, well, whatever you're wanting to do, it's already shaped by your situation, your place in the world. So that's the way I looked at the majority of or the biggest idea that came out of it.
Yeah, I got the exact thing too, about it being basically, to me, it sounded like this person does not believe in free will.
Sure, yeah.
So everything is kind of so basically we are just a bunch of people that are just reacting to situations that we're presented with, right?
Sure, yeah.
So just a stimulus machine. What about you, Jason? What do you think this is about?
I mean, I think that it is a lot about what you guys are saying as far as being a refutation of free will, but the very last sentence says ultimately nothing or almost nothing about what a person does seems to be under his control. And again, it's it being an expert or an excerpt. It's again, there's like a clue that is like, you know, about to like turn a corner on you, you know. So the part that we're reading is kind of it's almost like instead of refuting Kant, it's like overinflating it, or following this sort of like Kantian idea out to its logical conclusion. That's how you say it in German. That's That's not my fault. I got, I've got the moral luck in this case. Anyways, right. I mean, he's showing that it doesn't work, but he's not just refuting it, but he's kind of going, well, we take it to the next step, that, this, that. I think his examples are easily problematized anyways. I don't know if they're bad. They leave a lot to be desired, I would say, but I don't know who the audience for this is necessarily. So
what did you say? What do you think? Why do you think his examples were problematic? So he used the example of, so whether we succeed or fail in what we try to do nearly always depends on some extent on factors beyond our control, like murder, altruism, revolution, and even goes to say choice. So why do you think that that's problematic?
Well, the example he gives about the reckless driver, where it's like, whether or not that reckless driving leads to a problem depends upon whether or not there's a pedestrian out walking around, which is a little bit of victim blaming or something.
I felt the same way, yeah.
In a modern context. So it's like, I do see what he's saying, but if we're talking about assigning blame versus just observing a mechanical process or whatever, then it definitely, the recklessness was already there. It's already described as reckless or whatever. So
yeah, and my question isn't reckless driving in and of itself the bad moral choice or the wrong moral choice? So,
I would think so.
Well, I would jump in and say that it's a wrong, it's like varying degrees. You're like, oh, should I get so hammered that I just don't know what I'm doing? I know I'll have a problem behind the wheel, or is it like, I'm just going to drive a little bit fast. I know it's dangerous, but I'll be careful type of thing, but still making bad decisions. You're still retaining some control, but not as much as if you're just, really drunk and don't know where you're at.
right. And so this guy is trying to say that no matter what choices we make, right or wrong, there's no real right or wrong in the outcome of those choices. Is that what you guys are getting to?
I think so. I mean, part of what one of the first things I thought of was Werner von Braun, the guy who created one of those newfangled rockets. And it's like, hey, maybe if there was no Nazis around, maybe it would have been all positive rocketry,
Yeah.
But because he was surrounded and he grew up wherever he was, his rockets, were used for evil instead of like flowers and balloons.
Like they should be.
Yeah.
The original intent of rocket building. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's the same sort of argument he makes when he talks about like the Nazis and how if you were born into Nazi Germany, you might have gone along with the program. And, so.
Yeah. But yeah, exactly. Like he says, someone who was an officer in a concentration camp might have led a quiet and harmless life if the Nazis had not come to power, he says. But that seems to be overlooking the general malaise, let's say, of post-World War I Germany. I mean, the opportunities for a quiet, harmless life in sort of war-torn Weimar Germany,
But I think maybe that's what
bloody likely.
I think that's actually what he's talking about in terms of, there are so many factors that go into why people make the choices that they make, that it's no longer really up to the individual to make choices. They're just operating within these confines of what choices they can make, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so while he doesn't talk about all the nuances of Nazi Germany, he just makes that very like broad argument about how a person could easily be taken in.
Yeah. Well, we actually went, I'm sorry, we got a little bit. The one part of the equation that we did leave out, as far as what the overall thing is about, is the title of the thing or whatever. You know, it is about like suggesting that there is such a thing as moral luck, which, you know, you can extend kind of what he's saying. It could be that he's talking in the direction of arguing for the existence of something like white privilege or white male privilege or whatever it is. I mean, this sort of like circumstance. I mean, certainly historically, white people have sort of used their circumstances to as evidence of providence, you know, suggesting that they are in fact sort of God's chosen people or whatever it is. And so, you know, it does seem like he's sort of creating that scenario and questioning it, you know, well, what to call it, basically. Defining the principle of moral luck seems to be the overall object of this thing.
And John, how would you define moral luck based on this reading?
You know, I would say that I'm a pretty decent person, but if I were to be placed in circumstances, you know, that were a lot less positive, a third world country, you know, someplace where, you know, I had experienced severe trauma, you know, at an early age, and I couldn't move past that. If I was placed in a circumstance where it just locked me into a specific behavior, I can see that happening. I mean, it's kind of to take that whole philosophy of free will versus fate. You know, how much of our fate is predetermined by just the state of the world and things that have happened many years before we were even born, you know. So I can kind of see some of that as far as, hey, we're just dropped into this place. And there's going to be a difference between if you're born in Ghana or if you're born in, you know, Beverly Hills. Your actions are going to be a little bit different, I think.
Right,
your motivations, your personal makeup, just your thoughts, your beliefs, everything, your very being is going to motivate you towards a different way of thinking and different actions, you know.
Right. So even morality would shift based on the way that you were raised and the way and the situation that was happening around you when you were growing up, or even as an adult, right?
I think so. I'm pretty sure that yeah. I mean, also if you have someone who's really successful and they're have good intentions, but something happens that changes their position in life, maybe even how would you say, beyond changing their thoughts and ideas, maybe there's some sort of physical or mental change that, you know, they can't even comprehend. They're just a different person because of whatever external factors, and they might not even know it, you know, not even realize it.
Yeah, there was I think it was either a Radio Lab or This American Life, where it was a story about a guy who was arrested for having child pornography, but they found out that he didn't start watching child pornography until after he had had brain surgery. So, so it's like, okay, how do we evaluate this? Like, you know, morally, well, obviously it's wrong, but still, it's just like, yeah, you're right, that any situation can like completely change a person.
I think so too, and I think, you know, to go back to the whole trauma thing, you know, if you're developed if you develop in life under a specific trauma, I think that'll definitely affect how your brain functions, how you form those neural connections, all that kind of stuff.
So what did you guys have for how this would apply to your life?
Jason,
I'll gladly go first. It ties into my life, like just as the argument itself, the thing in itself ties in, because if I have a sort of philosophical project, which I guess, you know, if I were a sort of legitimate academic or something, I would say that, the project I'm presently working on is delineating the actual line between ignorance and evil. With, you know, i.e., like the banality of evil, or even you know, one of the things that rings a little bit odd, you know, in this thing, very early he says he would have presumably said the same thing about a bad will, which I'm not sort of context expert or anything like that, but I think that he has a very specific, different idea of what kind of evil is and everything. And so I don't know that he would actually say the same about the bad will as what he does about the good will, which is just essentially the moral will, you know, the which conforms to God. And so, you know, when I get caught up in sort of trying to sort of generate an argument about the difference between ignorance and evil, re, I support the troops, but I don't support the war. There's a lot of there's a lot of choices that the sort of contemporary individual makes that in order to assess that individual, you kind of have to draw a line between ignorance and evil. The more you learn about American history, for instance. So I would say it is in considering one's identity as an American in the 21st century, and sort of forces one to delineate the difference between ignorance and evil. Because you know, when you're saying I support the troops but I don't support the war, what are you saying? You know, the war is evil, but the troops are what exactly?
Angels.
You know?
They're little angels trolloping through the daisies.
Yeah, and I think when you really unpack that argument, the answer is ignorant. Because either the war is good, and ergo the troops are good, or the war is bad, ergo the troops are bad, or what? And like the answers that sort of like the Nazis that everybody likes to talk about so much gave was that they were, you know, just following orders, and that has come to be known, right, as the sort of banality of evil. You know what I mean? Evil isn't a monster; it's just a regular dude in a business suit, you know.
Right.
So anyway, that's how it applies to me personally, you know, in considering the banality of evil and the difference between evil and ignorance, which there may in fact be no difference except one's own personal interest.
So you think ignorance is basically a bad moral luck?
Well, oftentimes it's good moral luck. Right. I mean, I think if you follow the logic of this argument, then, you know, the American soldier is sort of benefiting from the ignorance of not really understanding the extraction of wealth from the global South, history of white supremacist extremism that in America, you know, whatever it is that makes you not support the war. So that's right. I don't know, you know, I guess you know, that was the whole Gulf War thing, right? There were bumper stickers and shit, right, that said that. And I was, you know, been very against that from the word go, you know. Like you can't have it both ways.
Right. So John, what's your personal story that you reflected on when you read this piece?
You know, my own personal story, I guess, came from my own personal experience. You know, growing up in Albuquerque, I feel like at one point in my life, there was a path I could have taken that would have sent me probably into the penile system, we'll say. Penal system, not penile. That's
Oh, you could go that way too if
Back?
you wanted.
yeah, nothing wrong with that. Maybe the penal system leads to the
Say
penile
back
system
into
if
the
you're there.
penile system.
Yeah, I mean, could be redundancy,
Mhm.
but the choices that I made early in life, I think they were influenced by, not to get it too much into this, but were influenced by some childhood traumas and some things that affected me in a certain way, and you could say even gave me a myopic view of how the world was, even for a kid, you know. Something that kind of, I guess you could say, really changed how I saw things, or without even knowing it. And it wasn't until I think probably a few years later, when I just got kind of lucky because of my circumstances. I had, you know, parents that would really get on me and weren't afraid of conflict or confrontation, even when I was, you know, all about that. They kind of honed in on that, and they were able to push me in a different direction. But just as easily, I could have left my house. I could have wound up in some sort of legal trouble for the next few years, and I could, you know, instead of working a 20-year job, you know, as I have, and having steady employment, a 401k, stuff that civilized people have, you know. I mean, or you know, people in the system. I could have totally been the guy that you see on the street, you know, walking around saying, "Oh, I wonder what happened to that dude. He looks like he's in his 40s, living on the street." So to me, my own personal experience and what I've gathered from life is that we all pretty much have the opportunity for evil intentions, good intentions. A lot of it is based on, you know, how you're shaped, you know, what forms you, your environment, all that kind of stuff. But if you have a strong enough personality and you have enough internal knowledge, you always have a chance of changing that on your own within, you know, what the circumstances allow. You might not be able to change everything completely, but you might be able to at least see the world in a different way. And I think that goes back and ties in to the original Kantian argument, which is that it's all about intent. So you could grow up in horrible, shitty circumstances, but you could look around and say, you know, this is not what makes me feel good, and this is not what I want, and I want to do something else. Or you could be buried under such a tremendous weight that you don't even have an opportunity to change your thinking.
Right.
So I could see both possibilities.
Yeah, so my personal story, I guess, is kind of a challenge to this, because I love the conversations about free will. Free will conversations are like my favorite. It's like lady boner. But I don't really have I don't have a position. I just really like listening to the arguments. I think both sides have really compelling arguments. But
Yeah.
in terms of moral luck, I think one of my biggest like personal things is, if you are traumatized or you are abused in some way, you then have the opportunity to either visit that on somebody else or not. And so to me, that represents a very conscious choice of whether you're going to stop a cycle or continue a cycle. And that can happen whether, you know, things are good or bad, but I'm in this scenario, I'm thinking bad. So if a person who's been abused or traumatized goes on to then abuse or traumatize others, then at that point, wouldn't you say that they were operating with, you know, a certain negative morality that he does not think really exists?
Wait, who's which he?
Nagel,
Nagel.
the writer, yeah.
Well, I would almost. I mean, I think you become almost more once you've like. I would agree with all of that, and then go on to say that on some level, the experience of being alive becomes traumatic enough at a certain point to understand that sort of visiting trauma upon a person is, morally wrong.
Right.
So I would happily remove that condition. But I would, in absence of that, in ignorance of that, I would say that, maybe visiting trauma on another person is not necessarily, if it's ignorant, or another sort of form of ignorance, miseducated. There's constantly sort of boomers who are like, well, I got spanked at home and spanked at school and this, that, and told I was trash, and I turned out okay. And it's like, you did not turn out okay. It is, that. So, that's a different kind of ignorance, right? That actually did me good. I'm actually better for that experience. Which is, now it's a really complicated question, because it's like, well, in that person's mind, they're operating on this principle that the person that they are is the result of this trauma.
Right.
So that has to not be bad. That's me we're talking about. And that can't be bad. That's the one thing that can't be bad, right, is me. Which is not really, doesn't really hold a lot of water, but I think that's what people sort of walk around in that ignorance, largely. So I forget what we were talking about.
All right,
but not exactly.
That's fine. It's fine. So the next question is how do you think that this work applies to society? Now, Jason, your answer was kind of related to society in a way, but you can do another one.
I guess so. I mean, I was trying to relate it to my relationship with society, I guess. I don't know that I'm comprehensible 9 times out of 10, to be honest with you, but that's okay. Anyway, right? We got to talk about the freaking, I guess by the time this comes out, it's going to be old news or whatever, but in this moment right now, it's got to be to do with the submersible thing, right?
Yeah. I had a feeling this was going to come up.
It kind of has to. I mean, I'm reluctant. There's any number of examples could come up or whatever, but it's got to, it's so like right there, this guy, this is not really a story of the moment, right? This is the end of a 6-month-long story that started on CBS, with even a news anchor going, I don't know about this. Right? And I mean, it's got the character of the lady who's been saving up her money for 30 years to do this thing, and she's tried a bunch of times, and it's always been bad weather. And thank God it wasn't her this time, you know what I mean? Because it's not always billionaires,
Right.
And even among the billionaires, there's a 19-year-old that nobody wants to talk about, that is surely not some evil monopoly man or whatever, But anyway, it's so it's with respect to the guy though, right? Stockton Rush or whatever his name is. I didn't think to make, I'm pretty sure that's what his name is, but I didn't actually write it down. Anyways, right, it applies to that guy entirely, right? Because he's done this to people, however many times so far, and he's been the benefactor of moral luck. But he's also spent a lot of time on a boat, unable to actually take people down because the weather conditions weren't right, and this and that and the other thing. So all of those times, these people spent $250,000 to go stand out in the rain for 8 days with nothing else to show for it. And so where's but at the same time, there's a woman who has been like obsessed with the Titanic or whatever, for like 30 years and has been saving up the $250,000. This is like her life. My God, if she was on there, it would be like Krista McAuliffe on the Challenger or whatever. It'd be like hugely tragic. But is that the teacher? I can't remember. I think
the teacher. I don't know who that, but I know what you're talking about. The
Krista
teacher
McAuliffe
on the Challenger.
astronaut, and
right.
Yeah, right. you know, it would be that level of sad. But honestly, even everybody kind of, and myself included, I'm sort of ambiguous with respect to the sort of think pieces around whether it's okay to joke about this or not. But there is also, I don't know, but anyway, I think with respect, we got to stay focused on the captain of the thing, you know, the CEO of the company or whatever, who thankfully was on the thing.
Yeah.
So you know, I think that situation just like cuts right to this. You know, there's the situations where they successfully went down, everybody had a good time, billionaires got to enjoy this thing that is not accessible to, you know, 99.99999% of the people who will ever live. And other times people basically got ripped off. And now, you know, we both pay the ultimate price for this, you know, this crazy thing this dude was allowed to do. Like,
yeah, it's a luck experiment. Let's see how long this can last. So what about you, John? What do you got?
Oh well, with how this translates to the sub thing. Oh man, I the one thing that I kept thinking about is just imagine being in that sub for those however many hours before you lost consciousness. That would just be, I think, a very unique human experience. I don't know. But as far as like how it relates to this situation right now, it got me to thinking about what if this happened on a rocket? You know, there's starting to be a lot more space travel these days. And I think they're actually looking at putting the first like commercial space travel, like just a trip up to space in the next year or so. I don't know if you guys read, if not sooner. But I wondered how we would feel, you know, would it be the same situation? Because it's essentially kind of the same situation, a submarine going underwater. You know, you can't really get to it. It's almost, you know, unreachable unless you have very specific equipment and technicians in place. And this is the same thing with something going into outer space. You know, there's a chance that, you know, something could go wrong. These people could be stuck out there, and then it'd be the same situation. There's almost no way to rescue people in certain situations. You just kind of, it just plays out and we all watch. And I think if we're going to look at the sub thing as far as being stranded and how it relates to this, I mean, the guy who put all of this together, you know, he had good intentions. He wanted to make a little scratch, but probably take some people down to the Titanic, show them, you know, some cool stuff. But in the end, it seems like he was a little bit, as well-intentioned as he was, he definitely left many opportunities for tragedy. Based on everything I've read, he kind of self-constructed these circumstances that would lead to an opportunity for this happening. So I can envision almost in a sense how, you know, he was a victim of circumstance, but also the circumstances he created. So I could take that a step further and say, you know, sure, we have free will and there's fate, but sometimes we kind of crawl into that fate and pull the dirt over us. So I think in this instance, if you're going to look at, hey, he had great intentions for sharing this amazing experience. And I bet you if any one of us went down there and didn't die, it would be an amazing experience. It'd be like, oh my God, I smoked a fat bowl and then I went down there and it was like all kinds of sea urchins and stupid shit. And then you come up and like, it's an amazing life-changing experience. But unfortunately, you know, it doesn't matter what his intentions were. The fact was that he had some really, negligent actions, you know, that created definitely an opportunity for tragedy. So I think with all his good intentions, you know, there was some stupidity, some hubris. And we've all seen with money. I mean, if I was rich, I would be the boy in the bubble. I would like never take any chances. I'd live in a vault. I would never get infected by anything. I would never get crushed by anything unexpectedly. I would like live in a rubber room with all that money just to be safe. But you have people that are like, nah, I'll just take a jet across the world, fly through some snowy weather, and then I'll just, you know, go diving in a sub that you can't get out of, by the way, unless you go up to the service and they unbolt you, which makes sense because of just the technical nature of going 12,000 feet under the ocean. But when you think about, you have to have so even if you get up there, to the surface, it doesn't matter, they can't get you out. They physically can't get you out unless they have like the jaws of life or something like that. I mean, when you add all of the circumstances together and the opportunities he left open, I think at a certain point, your good intentions almost, they're almost mean nothing because of the circumstances that you were oblivious to, and that you kind of ignored. Mm-hmm. And you're like, hey, follow me, come on, this would be great. And they're like, is it safe? And you're like, yeah, sure, and then the fact that you have these people, I mean, literally, you have their lives in your hand as the CEO of the company. I think that's hugely irresponsible. Me as a person, I could never envision myself putting people in that position unless I was absolutely certain that all bases were covered. And there's always an opportunity for Murphy's Law, but at the same time, I would never have personally gone towards any of those choices that he made, and just put people in that precarious position. It seems like it was just very, very bad decision making.
Right. So, John, I hope that you never become rich, because that sounds like torture for you.
Oh, no, it'd be great. I'd live with all my money and I'd just smell it and count it. And I'd send people out to have vicarious experiences. We have
virtual reality now. You can just have them record it so that you can experience it firsthand.
Yeah. Be GoPro, POV, whatever you want to call it.
I'm holding out for real virtuality.
Virtuality?
Yeah.
I don't know. Did you want to expand on that, Jason?
Well, kind of. I mean, I would want to go back to the sales pitch. The sales pitch that this guy is making to these billionaires is exactly the same as like Jeffrey Epstein, right? I mean, this guy's always been basically Jeffrey Epstein. I worked in marketing for a little while there, and worked with some clients who marketed exclusively to not billionaires, but certainly like 1%ers or whatever, you know what I mean? Certainly rich people in that. And the mindset of like, the only way you could really market to a billionaire is to offer them something that people cannot have. Mm-hmm. A normal person cannot have for one reason or another, quote unquote normal person. And so that's the proposition, like exactly what John was saying. That is kind of what this guy is offering to the billionaire. And, and he just got caught, I guess. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. I did kind of forget what I was, because I'm distracting myself with this. Ever since John brought up the jaws of life, that's another thing I don't like. If you're relying on the jaws of life to save you, you're in trouble. Because a mythical shark, why do people even believe in that?
Well, I was actually wondering if, like, you did have the jaws of life there, could that even open up that submarine? I mean, they're like, oh no, it has to be opened by special mechanism or something, like a huge bottle opener.
If it's not shark proof, you're screwed in the first place.
Oh yeah.
So this has all been very enlightening, because I've actually stopped following the news for mental health reasons. So I'm only hearing bits and pieces of it. So it's a very.
This is a TV show, by the way.
Yeah.
This is not a thing that's really going on.
It's the newest Netflix show. Everybody's like, "Whoa, can you believe it's that gripping?"
This is a Werner Herzog deal.
So I'm getting all this information in a very like absurdist way. So all I've heard this last week is that there is a billionaire in a submarine at the bottom of the ocean, and apparently killer whales might have something to do with it. So yeah, that's all.
That's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there apparently that whole different thing is orcas are attacking just random ships. Is that what's happening, Jason?
Something like that. Yeah, a random yacht.
Now, are they getting revenge on mankind for that scientist masturbating all the dolphins back in the 70s?
It was only one. It was only one dolphin.
Oh, so as far as you know.
It was a lady. It was the lady that was in the tank with him.
Right, and it was more than one scientist. She made other people do it. You gotta get sick days, you gotta cover your shit.
Imagine that call in. You're like, hey, I'm not going to be in today, but I need you to do something special with the test subject.
Or
that must be a tough sell.
If she's been in there for too long and her hands are all pruny, and the dolphin really doesn't like that. It's not a texture that goes with dolphin.
Yeah, it's not one they're expecting. Oh, very into smoothness, just across the board, those dolphins.
So I'm guessing, so my thing with how this ties into society, I actually had two. I had that Scientology, because one of the things that the questions that this asks is, do we view those with bad luck as morally bad? And he's saying that if we follow the Kantian view, it would follow that we would view people as people with bad luck are morally bad, but it would be wrong in the Kantian view. But it reminds me of Scientology's claim that when bad things happen to you, it's your fault.
Mm-hmm. Even that you've made the wrong choices,
or you've done stuff to put yourself in that position.
The same thing, but
yeah,
yeah, exactly. It's lack of wisdom, even so when they're trying to sort of talk you out of your hole. It's not your fault, it's just your lack of experience. It's just your lack of wisdom, and it's just your ignorance. Now, let's clear you up.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And then also, like, when we're talking about good moral luck, I wrote down Jeff Bezos's parents seed money to start Amazon. I'd say that's pretty good moral luck.
I would say that's good moral luck.
Yeah, I'd like to have that kind of moral luck.
Now, how does this tie into the whole morality of two millionaires being involved in a cage match? Because that's going to be pretty interesting, to see. If you haven't heard, Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk are probably going to set up a cage match. It happened through a Twitter exchange. So when you look at, I guess you could say moral luck. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, old Zuck, he has this huge empire that's changed the face of American society. That was kind of, I guess you could say, moral luck for the entire country, that this thing came about that kind of pushed us socially in different directions and has such a grip on us. I think that's a little bit of moral luck there. Is Facebook good or bad? Does it have good intentions or bad intentions?
Well, it kind of depends. I mean, if you consider humanity as it stands now as some sort of larval phase that will emerge, as 1% of us will emerge into the next phase of humanity as some sort of butterfly, then sure, Facebook is great. But if you some sort of humanist or whatever who thinks we should endeavor to prosper collectively as one multivalent creature or whatever, then yeah, bad, I would say, bad probably.
And that kind of ties into the whole theme of moral luck, is Zuck, because of his moral luck, is born in America, went to this fine institution, had these friends that he made, and created this program here that became such a big influence on America, or on the world, actually. But then,
isn't by his Sorry.
I was going to say he created circumstance too. So now everything that was a moral luck for him, he's now involved in moral luck for others. You know, people that are growing up in a world of Facebook, where your grandma posts something about Trump or something like that, and so now his moral luck is kind of, I guess you could say, it just keeps going, and it's affecting other people. So he's, in a sense, his moral luck is kind of affected those that come after him, I guess you could say. So now Facebook kind of affects all of us, type of thing. I think we're getting in the weeds, but basically, you know, it's another thing that is affecting the world right now.
No, yeah, Facebook becomes the external source, right? The thing that is that forces us to make our choices.
Or influences some of it, or influences the society we're growing up in. You know, would Trump have won the 2016 election without Facebook
or Twitter?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the complication I was hoping to throw in there. I mean, I think it is moral bad luck, right? I mean, even by Zuckerberg's own sort of admission, like, he's not like a Trump fan, right? And he banned Trump from his platform. So he sort of accidentally, the external forces from Zuck's perspective is like, oh crap, I can't like sort of manipulate people for advertising money without accidentally
tipping an election,
influencing elections, and having all these real world consequences, and creating a platform. I just wanted to, I just wanted to take control of a bunch of people's attention, and then, sell that to companies as a marketing product. I mean, that's really all he was trying to do. So he has a certain amount of moral bad luck, which I think you could say is somewhat of a consequence of, like, getting involved in marketing, really. I mean, it's like inherently evil, so that has led him to, Meta's not really taking off. The only people who, Facebook and all this stuff is supposed to be about the future, but the only people really truly engaged in Facebook in a non-ironic way are people who are going to die soon. You know what I mean? Largely, right? It's mostly boomers, and then you got a certain type of sort of credulous Gen Xer, millennial. You're diminishing returns until you get below a certain sort of like age, and there's just no representation on Facebook whatsoever. So that's not good for Facebook. I mean, in the short term, he can continue to like sort of milk Social Security. Well, it's not even, he's not directly making money from his audience, but he is making marketing money by demonstrating that he has control over this many people. I mean, that's kind of what marketing is. You go to a company and say, well, I have control over this many people. What is that? What can we, if you can use that for anything, I would love to represent your product or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think
building a brand is,
Yeah, it's you sell them your data for money. Yeah, it's a data aggregate for sure. All right, so did any other things you want to talk about before we get to our very last question? Is there something that we missed?
Well, let's see. I think no, I've mentioned that. The one thing I sort of left, I wrote it down. There must be some reason to talk about it. If the condition of control is consistently applied, it threatens to erode most of the assessments we find it natural to make. He says that. And I have a problem with natural. Right. What is natural about sort of assessing moral judgment, outward anyway, inward, sure, but what's natural about that? I think useful, I might be more happy with that term, but anytime the word nature comes up, then I decide to be a pain in the ass about it, you know.
Is that because nature is neither good nor bad? It's not, you know, it's brutal in nature, but that's just because I think the universe just happens. It has no feelings. I mean, it wiped out dinosaurs that ruled the earth for millions of years in the blink of an eye. So the universe is uncaring. And I think for maybe what you're getting at is that, you know, the universe doesn't have good or bad intentions. It just happens. Inwardly, you know, something might make us feel good or bad based on how we react to what we did. But as far as the nature concerns, you know, it just happens. It doesn't care if, you know, millions of dinosaurs die or a mosquito lives, or it's just there.
Right. Yeah. So it's so I mean, in this case, well, that's right. It's not Kant talking. It's Nagel. But you know, you can't. You know, if it's Kant talking, nature is just God. But I assume that this. Well, I don't know. I want to. That's not. That is one example. The sort of uncaring nature of nature. Exactly is why it seems sort of odd to suggest that sort of moral assessments are not some sort of technology that is simply part of a functioning society or whatever. We have to be on the same page on some fundamental level, or else we'll just have chaos or whatever. Which I don't necessarily agree with, but I definitely find it odd to suggest that imposing moral judgment is some sort of natural process. That seems odd to me. So I guess it's one little note, I guess, which I could have saved for the final question and just figured a way to wedge it into there somehow, but instead I figured it would be more awkward. Wedge it in here.
Well, I thought that was really thought-provoking because, like you said, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, those Enlightenment, Age of Enlightenment philosophers. It's interesting that there were so much about science and, you know, cutting down on the rhetoric of a religion, but they were still pretty heavily tied to that you know, all things religious, and, you know, how man viewed the world at that point. So I always found that kind of interesting. And you brought up, you know, the fact that Kant would have viewed nature as God, which, you know, yeah, it seems like a lot of those guys are like, oh, nature is good and God, he works in mysterious ways, instead of being like, it's just a bunch of particles and matter that does what it does, you know?
Yeah, that's something Hume would have said. I'm being a nerd. All right. But yeah, that was actually nature being indifferent. That was my very first mushroom trip. That was one of the messages I got, is that nature is
these mushrooms don't give a fuck about me, man. Whoa. Like that.
No, it was so my dad was in Vietnam. And so what I saw like birds, because I was in Key West in Florida, and I saw birds flying across the sky, and they were leaving like these bomb trails underneath them. And my brain just went to nature is indifferent. And I also saw a naked Native American man, which ended up just being a tree.
Oh, huh.
I took a picture of it too. It actually does look like a person standing there.
Oh.
with his dong out. So when do we think this was written and why? I think the why is pretty obvious.
Yeah, like what else are you gonna do? Yeah, I agree.
When? The when?
Mm-hmm.
I would say, if I had to guess, I'd say the ninth. Oh, go ahead, Jason. Were you gonna jump in there?
No, I was gonna make a stupid joke.
Make a stupid joke.
Yeah.
It's got late night vibes. That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, he's up. He's like 2 a.m. He's just like, oh, what is this horse shit? starts just writing
Yeah.
thoughts and goes off on a tangent.
Right, exactly. Kind of rambles. It's a little, the examples are a little weak and not thought all the way through. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what was the example of the guy rescuing someone from the building, but then accidentally dropping them from a 12th story? It's like, how does that rescue plan go into place? You're just like, oh, no ladders, just throw them off the building. I don't know what's gonna. Maybe you're running too fast and they just fly from your grasp. I don't know. But...
Yeah, I thought, okay, now this is like, maybe this is still a too soon joke, but I was thinking 9/11. I was thinking like probably most likely to happen during like a 9/11 sort of incident.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really have to stretch a little to figure out like, okay, well, how is it he says there's a huge moral distinction between trying and failing to rescue a person, basically. I mean, the 12-story drop is just for dramatic effect, I guess, but in what scenario is the person who fails to save the person like bad, unless it's like, well, the fire's not even close. Maybe it would be a better idea to just call 911, but someone is trying to be a hero because they're trying to compensate for their lack of physical stature, and they are doing something that is ego-driven by trying to be a hero when they should just call the proper authorities. In that case, I guess, but
or maybe it falls into maybe it falls into your ignorance, the whole like they don't know what they're doing, so they make stupid choices.
Yeah, I suppose.
Oh yeah, like taking people to the bottom of the ocean, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
All right. So do we have a time? Do we have a date?
About the 80s, right? Just
I'm
like 80s because Nagel and that Duran painting. That's what I guess that's why I think it's from the 80s.
You think it's from the 80s? Okay. All right.
I was gonna go with the 60s just because of radical thought, man, and just exploring all this stuff and tearing down the whole previous way of thinking. That's just kind of what I thought, but I could be way off.
Okay, so I was thinking that he wrote this because he was doing a critique of Kant, which means he must have been a contemporary of Kant, which means he would have written this in what, like the 1800s? Is that when Kant was a thing?
Mid, I think, right? No. Kant is the 1730s, 1750s, 18th century, but I'm pretty sure Kant is 1730 to 50 kind of vibes. He's the very sort of beginning of the sort of trajectory from Kant to Nietzsche. Right?
Okay, I'm going to split the difference, and I'm going to say 1780.
Okay.
1780, and the reason he wrote it was in response to Kant. That was my guess.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be this guy, but he does talk about the Nazis.
Oh my God, you're right. You're right. He does talk about the Nazis. Holy shit. How did I fucking miss that? Okay, I take it back then. I'm going to say, let's see, the Nazis. Now, he actually talks about the Nazis as if it was pretty far back. You're right. So I'm gonna change that. I'm gonna say 1960s.
You could go Prices Right on that and say 1961.
Yeah, let's do that. Who's closest without going over? Oh my God, I feel like such an idiot right now. That is true. He did talk about the Nazis. Jesus.
I think anytime you're discussing philosophical beliefs, anyone has a chance to appear like an idiot at certain moments.
That is true.
Well,
that is true.
I do agree with the underlying premise of your guess. Like, why? At a certain point, it's like, why are we still talking about this?
Yes.
Like,
why are we still talking about Kant?
Right. He doesn't even have electricity.
Yeah.
Like, the basic principles. Okay, sure. Can I get some cliff notes on this shit? But I'm reading through 1.5 miles of fucking uncut weeds to understand like the thing in itself, which at the end of the day, it means what it sounds like. You know what I mean? There's a whole fucking chapter and a whole fucking ass book talking about what the thing in itself is. And it's pretty much what it sounds like. You know? It's the thing in itself as opposed to the thing that represents the thing or mimics the thing or whatever. You know what I mean? It's fucking the thing that you can't, it's for the Platonic form or whatever. There was already a word for this, you motherfucker.
Yeah.
What I feel like trying to read through some of that stuff. So
well, that's why we're doing this, is so that it cuts through all the bullshit and we can get to the meat bones of the shit. Yes.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of more sort of contemporary stuff where where you can just kind of get the Kantian ideas through I don't know, Baudrillard or something, you know what I mean? And just something a little, some guy who knows about the internet or whatever and can like, synthesize the internet with the thing in itself, which, would be pretty helpful to young people. But the only choice is to read like, this ancient gobbledygook, that was written for people who didn't have anything else to do. That's another thing. Like people who complain that this stuff is too dense to read have a point, but at the same time, the people for whom it was written had literally all day to read this crap. You know what I mean? While their slaves did all the real work.
Yeah, but it was also written. It was also written for academics as well. So.
Well, yeah, sure. The Nagel thing, and to a certain extent the Kant thing, but the sense of what an academic was in the 18th century is, he's writing more or less for people who can read.
Yeah,
which
and that Bible is pretty. That Bible has a lot of really stupid words in it too. So maybe we should do that too.
Yeah. Well, don't get me started on it. I got the Baker Encyclopedia of Christian Apologetics right here.
Oh, nice. Okay, so do we all feel comfortable with
the Bible?
Do we all feel comfortable about our answers on when it was written and why it was written?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily think I'm right, but I'm sticking with it.
Okay.
I think Jason's probably pretty close to the actual date. I'm going to stick with the 60s just because of how I feel about it. But I think the reason why they would have done it in the 60s, or the reason why it was done, is to kind of turn over and examine that idea that Kant put forward and see what holes, he can poke in it, but also to spur a little bit of thought to find out, why did people believe this at one time, and how have our views changed with regards to the time that that was written to now when he's writing this rebuttal. That's kind of, or this examination of it. That's kind of why I thought maybe it was written in the 60s or some place a couple hundred years afterwards, is because it's something that this guy, also the Nazis, I didn't think of that until just now when Jason mentioned it. So I'm in that club too. But also the fact that it seems like something someone would have written 100 or 200 years after the original piece was written, just something that people have turned over in their mind over and over, other people's minds, probably read a lot of a lot on this subject matter. And from where he's coming from, to me, it seemed like this was something that this guy's had a hard on for a long time about.
And that's kind of just what philosophy is to a certain extent.
Right.
Just have to be like, well, look, this guy said this and it's almost right, but check out how smart I am. I'm a little bit. Eventually, some jerk's gonna come along and write the perfect philosophy, and then that'll be it.
They're gonna ask the question: can you kill your grandfather if you travel back in time? And that's the disruptors.
Yeah, and then every grandpa in the world's gonna start sitting around with a shotgun, more than they already do.
As if they aren't already. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys. This was a fun one. I like this one.
This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed chatting with you folks.
Yeah, and if you want to do it again, just let me know. Jason's already done it twice. Anyway, so yeah, so the next thing I will do is I will text you guys as soon as I get the expert, as soon as I edit the episode, have the expert take a look at it, grade it, and then we'll all reconvene and figure out how well we did. And then that second episode is when you guys can promote anything that you want to promote, because by that time I should be pretty much publishing it pretty quickly afterwards.
Well, I have a new submarine company that I'm hoping to promote, so that'll go.
Yeah, I heard there's an opening. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an opening for submarine companies. And I hear you can clean up pretty well.
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
Just sign that waiver.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. I love this. Have a great day.
Yes. See you later. You too. Bye.
Bye. Bye, Jason.
Bye, John.
Today we are joined by a philosophy professor, right? Garrett
That's right.
Pendergraft. And you want to give us like kind of a little bio so we know what we're dealing with here, who we're up against?
Sure. So I teach philosophy at Pepperdine University in LA area, Malibu. Been teaching here, I guess about starting my 14th year. Did my graduate work at various places, too many places probably, but among them were University of Missouri and UC Riverside. Most of what I like to read and write about it involves free will and moral responsibility and those kinds of issues. My undergraduate background was actually computer science. I worked in visual effects for a few years, and then decided I wanted to go the academia route. But yeah, that's happy to fill in more details, but that's a sort of a sketch.
So yeah, so this is something that we touched on in this moral luck episode, is the idea of free will. So I think we were all kind of in agreement that this is basically saying that free will does not exist. Would we be accurate in making that assumption?
Yeah, it's certainly, I would say it's definitely calling into question free will. It's and part of this comes out more in the later parts of the article. So, I know giving you an excerpt makes it a little bit harder to get the full picture, but kind of what he's trying to do is make it hard for us to let me back up. When we think about what we're responsible for and what what kind of freedom we have, we usually just focus on control, and we sort of think, everyone kind of thinks, oh, well, if I have control over it, then I'm probably responsible for it. And if I don't, then I'm probably not. And so that's just sort of how things work. But he's kind of pointing out that if you really think about what we have control over, the range or the scope of things that we have control over is pretty limited and pretty narrow. So I wouldn't say he's not directly saying we don't have free will. He's saying you're either going to have to give up on this assumption that control is the most important thing, or you're going to have to give up on some freedom or some responsibility. So I think actually this word came up a couple times in your discussion, but he's sort of problematizing free will and more responsibility. He's just trying to I don't know, introduce some discomfort into the discourse and say, yeah, I mean, it seems like we're free. It seems like all that we can be held responsible for is what we have control over. But if you really take that to its logical conclusion, then you end up with not much left. And so what are you supposed to do about that? And then he essentially ends by saying, hard to say.
I think the whole idea, the example of the reckless driver thing, I think that's where I get a little bit stuck, because I feel like you do have a choice in that moment whether or not you're going to get
yeah.
feel.
And yeah, that's that's a really good example to bring up, because that is probably the example that's used the most when people are trying to raise these issues. And yeah, I think I'd be curious because what you all think about the point he's trying to make. Because what he's trying to say is that two people who are equally negligent, say with how much they drink. He talks about the truck driver whose brakes go out. But I guess the point is that you could just imagine two drunk drivers, and they both have however, they're whatever blood alcohol level or how many drinks you want to talk about. So they both had 6 drinks and then they go drive. And Nagel's point is that that's the same, you can imagine whether it's like, it happens once and then you sort of rewind the tape and do it again with slight differences, or you imagine like 2 sort of identical scenarios with 1 tweak, however you want to imagine it. You can imagine the same amount of thoughtlessness and negligence, so maybe there's some concern and like, oh, maybe I shouldn't drive, but I think it'll be fine. So whatever, or it could be just like no concern at all, like no problem, I've done it a million times. So whatever level of negligence and recklessness you want to put in there, just hold that fixed and consistent between the 2 individuals. And then the point is that one person gets really unlucky because a pedestrian runs out in front and he kills a pedestrian. And then the other person gets lucky because he just, I guess he runs up on the sidewalk in that example. So they both run up on the sidewalk. One guy gets super lucky because there was nobody nearby, so he just damaged some property and no big deal, doesn't even get caught. The other guy is super unlucky because there was a pedestrian on the sidewalk. And so the point there is that if we're blaming or punishing these guys, they did have a choice. That's exactly right.
Mhm.
And what they chose to do, now at the moment of the accident, maybe they didn't have control because they were drunk, but so the choice traces back to when they decided to drive or when they decided to have that 6th drink or whatever. And so they both had a choice, and they're both blameworthy for deciding to drive while drunk or for having too many drinks and then driving. But the point is that we don't just stop there. We also think that the guy who injured or killed the pedestrian is a lot worse, and deserves a lot more blame and a lot more punishment. And so that's the tension, is that seems pretty intuitive. Like no one's going to say, well, it's just because there happened to be people on the sidewalk. If they hadn't been there, then he would have been fine. So we should just, so like but he could try to in his plea or in front of the judge or whatever, he could say, look, I admit that I shouldn't have driven, but it's not my fault that there were people there. Like this, you let this other guy off with just a warning or a ticket. But you're putting me in jail. Like, that's not fair. I didn't have any control over who was walking at the time. And of course that kind of defense is not really going to fly. And I don't think anybody would be tempted to buy it. So that's really the point, is that, there's control over parts of it, but in a case like this, with this tragic outcome, like by far the most, blame attaches to the fact that the pedestrian was killed, but that's the part that was out of his control. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of supposed to be the conundrum or the paradox, is that the thing that we get most worked up about, and rightly so, is the thing that he has no control over.
The unintended consequences, of his action. Right. Because it's not like he went out and said, I'm going to drink and drive and I'm going to kill as many people as possible. Yeah. It was just,
right.
Yeah.
He just did something that people do all the time, unfortunately, and most of them get away with it. And, they sort of have some regrets, and, they're like, I need to do better, and that's all fine. Other people go to jail for a long time and spend the rest of their life regretting it. And yet, in both those cases, the amount of what was under their control could have been exactly the same. In fact, you could even have someone who's in a lot worse shape and a lot more reckless, who doesn't hurt anybody. So that's kind of the I don't know. Does that seem to you all like? Does that seem to be sort of a tension there between, the what's under control and what we actually blame and punish for, or I don't know if that addresses the concern you're raising, but.
Well, I think the true evil person who decided, 6 inches of concrete is enough to establish a difference between a roadway and a walkway. In the first place.
That traces back a lot farther than civil engineering is what it all comes down to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, which is to say that we're deliberately put in a perilous situation.
Yeah.
Where we have to have these sort of where they have this sort of morality enforced upon us. Whereas we could have a social design that encourages immoral behavior, and it wouldn't necessarily not be a functioning society, as evidenced by, our existing society.
Well, yeah, that's true. And that, I mean, I think that kind of points out that there's a lot more blame to go around. I mean, you can, for any of these specific incidents, you can always point to various factors. And this is kind of a sidebar, but I think it's interesting if you look at, I think there are studies that show if you raise the speed limit by 5 miles per hour, then you end up with, like, I don't know, I don't know the exact numbers, but let's say it's like 10,000 more deaths a year.
Wow.
And so it's like, when I think if we hear the news, hey, speed limit's going up from 65 to 70, we're like, oh, sweet, I'll save some time. And people who did that literally, well, they don't literally have blood on their hands, but they're doing something that is guaranteed to produce more deaths. Anyway, the social design is really interesting.
Without making any additional infrastructure changes or whatever, without widening the highways or moving the sidewalks, or so on and so forth. I guess I'm not trying to be like I'm not trying to like create this sort of frustrating sweater of an argument where I just keep, it's not like that. But what I'm getting at is what my response to the sort of free will issue here is that we don't have free will, but the thing is, we don't have the other thing either. And so you're kind of stuck with free will. We have no choice in the matter. We are stuck with free will because this other thing is this thing that we're projecting that we wish we had, which is to say some meaning, some teleology, some point to all of this.
Sounds a little existentialist.
Sure. Yeah. No doubt.
I do remember that it was during the Clinton administration where the speed limit went up like 10 miles an hour more. And do you think the studies had already been done by that time? So he's just all leading all willy-nilly.
That's a good question. I've seen them sort of since in the past, decade or two. That's a good question. I don't know. And so that's at the national level. That's an issue too.
I thought I had read somewhere that during the Clinton administration, he had proposed raising the highway speed to 69 just as a goof. I don't know. It seems like it's pretty probable, but
it's that would be I guess it's like those neighborhoods that have a speed limit of 12 or whatever, just so you'll notice it.
Okay.
Along those lines.
The ones that R. Kelly cannot drive through, right? Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. If it's 12 or if it's a number, it's not a 5 or a 10, then R. Kelly's not allowed. I'd be open to every state needs to have a unique speed limit. Like, you can't, once someone uses 65, no one else gets to use it. You got to pick a different one. I'd be open to that.
You could do the old Price is Right goof, right? Where you're like, we'll take 66, right? Mm-hmm. You just keep creeping it up there.
Yeah.
The speed limit is the average grade of the high school student in your community.
That might be enough incentive to get the scores up.
Yeah. So the first question is, what does this mean? And so Jason and John both gave their general answer of what this excerpt meant. So how do you think that they did?
Right. Well, if I can, I'll give, so I do have an overall winner, I guess you could say, but on this one, I think it's kind of I sort of would give a +1 to both Jason and John for different reasons, if I can. I think, and then I have, and then there's some others, so a few +1s and a few -1s. But the +1, that's right. The +1 for Jason on what it means was, so I think the initial kind of take on it was that it was trying to sort of refute, I guess to refute Kant or refute his view And Jason pointed out that it's not really attacking Kant directly. It's just using Kant to set up the discussion, which is well, as far as I can tell, is exactly right. So he's like, hey, here's this famous view in the history of philosophy that traces back to Kant, and it says this and that, and seems like there's, if we take that seriously, then we run into these problems, and then he's sort of off to the races. So that was definitely a +1 for Jason, that he's trying to set up the debate by kind of like raising the specter of this historical view. And he's not interested, he says, like, it seems like Kant is wrong here, and so he just kind of like dismisses or just sort of he kind of casts some shade on Kant's view, but he's not really interested in proving Kant wrong. He's more interested in kind of highlighting this tension between some of these, ordinary notions and concepts we have. So I think that was a +1. And then what I liked about what John had to say in response to that question was the way he kind of personalized the definition of moral luck. And I think John sort of said, there's various parts about my history and my background that contributed to who I am today. So he kind of, Nagel talks about the prior kind of causes, the antecedents of who we are, and also like the way we're made and the circumstances we're in and those kinds of things. And so John did a great job of kind of explaining and highlighting that part of the definition, that it really is what the idea of moral luck is trying to help everyone realize that. And a lot of this is just sort of luck in general and not necessarily just moral luck, but when it comes to both how we are morally speaking and also how we are in every other way, there's a lot of things that could have gone differently, and we would have ended up better or worse. In a lot of cases ended up worse. So that was what I appreciated about the answer to the first question. So at this juncture, it's +1 for both John and Jason.
Good job.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Yeah, John came into this thinking he had a real disadvantage, so we'll see.
Yeah, but that's
I'm sure it'll become apparent.
Reverse psychiatry, I believe, is what.
That's a different.
Who's trying to sell me drugs? Is what I'm trying to say.
Reverse psychiatry. Oh, that's a new one. I like that one.
All right.
One thing I did want to add, and this goes back to maybe another point on the reckless driver case. I think it was, I think both John and Jason kind of brought it up and discussed it, and there was a mention of, maybe this being victim blaming, and so I wanted to kind of ask about that, if what was meant there. I guess I wasn't sure about that. I guess I wanted to hear more about that on how that example sort of incorporates or involves some victim blaming.
Jason, do you remember your contribution to that?
I'm sure I'm the one who said it. What was the example I was talking about?
Okay, so when they were talking about the reckless driver, and then there was the person that was hit as a result of the accident, you said it sounded like victim blaming, and I agreed with you because it did sound like victim blaming. So did you want to expand on that, or do you want me to try and tackle it? I don't want to.
If you go for it, I have it here. I'm sure I could catch up. I just don't immediately. If I look at it, I'm sure. I mean, the pedestrian. I don't remember, but I'm sure that if you stall for a second or something, I could come up with something.
Was it that it could be seen as victim blaming if we blamed the guy for just walking in the street? Was it something along those lines, or is it
I think
a justification of victim blaming?
I think it was. I think it felt like, it had the person not been there, then this whole thing wouldn't have happened. It was just kind of like that example that you had said before.
Oh yeah, the actual it says, and I read. But whether a reckless driver hits a pedestrian depends on the presence of the pedestrian at the point where he recklessly passes a red light. So Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that statement sounds like victim blaming,
Uh,
right? I mean, that's what victim blaming is. I mean, I don't know that he's necessarily purporting that statement. I think it maybe said in just like passing or whatever, but right, to argue that the pedestrian wouldn't have gotten hit if he hadn't been there to be hit would be victim blaming, right? Or even if a
no,
person was recklessly pedestrianing.
walking well under the influence. Um, yeah, I guess there I think he's just trying to right, and I can see how it could seem as though they're victim blaming. I think there he's just kind of trying to make a point about like the way the different causal factors played out. So it's really just saying like, look, the way the world happened to be at that moment, there was a pedestrian there, and so because there was also a car there, you had the accident. Whereas if there hadn't been a pedestrian there, you wouldn't have. So it's kind of like it's almost like, and this is sort of, philosophers love to talk about possible worlds, and thought experiments with different possible worlds. So it's kind of just like saying, hey, if you imagine a world without the pedestrian and a world with the pedestrian, as you like tweak that variable, you end up with very different outcomes. And so there is some like there's, I guess you could say, some responsibility there, but it's not like I don't think he's trying to say that it's the pedestrian's own fault he got hit. He's just saying if you hold fixed the car driving onto the sidewalk and then you add the pedestrian and subtract the pedestrian, as you sort of like toggle back and forth between pedestrian, no pedestrian, you end up with like huge difference. So like small change. Normally, if you add a pedestrian to your scene, doesn't make a big difference, but in this case makes all the difference. So it's more, and maybe it's kind of callous to sort of just, think about things that way. But anyway,
I think
go ahead,
this is where we get the thorn in our side, Jason and I, because it still really comes down to the reckless driver, right? Like that's the one we should
I
really
think it comes down to the intersection, personally.
Well, but I mean, so, and this is what also philosophers love to do is they like to tweak, take a thought experiment and like try to, make it as ironclad as possible. So I don't know. You can imagine even like a very safe intersection or safe thoroughfare, and like you can make the driver more and more reckless. Maybe it's something so safe it's just impossible for a car to even access the pedestrian. But yeah, it is true. Like if you're asking like overall, who's to blame, always the reckless driver. Yeah, no matter what. Well, I mean, if someone, like if he thought he was drinking non-alcoholic beer and someone planted alcohol to get it, so I guess you can tell the story in different ways. But yeah, it's a driver's fault. It's just that what the driver is at fault for is a lot different, a lot more significant if there happens to be a pedestrian there. And so, yeah, it's as good because it's hard to sort of toggle this factor pedestrian, no pedestrian without making it seem as though you're kind of blaming the pedestrian. And really it's not. It's just like, hey, it's really just imagine a situation where someone's just on their evening walk, doing what they always do. They're walking safely, they're paying attention, blah, blah, blah. So you can just stipulate that the pedestrian is doing nothing wrong. And then here comes a reckless driver. Well, the outcome, the story the next day is a lot more tragic if there's a pedestrian there than if there isn't.
Now, what if the pedestrian is wearing a bullseye T-shirt? I mean, does that absolve the driver of any culpability whatsoever?
Good question.
They posted on Facebook really sad posts a week leading into it.
Yeah, no, you could definitely tell the story. I mean, there's lots of interesting questions about because certainly, in fact, just yesterday there was a teenage pedestrian who ran in front of me as I was going down a hill about 50 miles per hour, and it wasn't like it wasn't super close call, but I had to hit the brakes pretty hard, and I was like that would have been a really bad deal. Well, yeah, I wasn't thinking about this, although I could have been. Anyway, there I was like sort of upset. I wanted to like I was like, it's too bad that there's just no way to sound cool and collected rolling down your window and yelling at someone when you're driving 50 miles per hour, because I wanted to have a few words for him, but anyway, yeah, certainly we could tell stories where the pedestrian is starts to pick up some of the blame for sure. But in this
Well,
case, blameless.
maybe we could do like a defense attorney, like construction, where we could write in some sort of scenario so it's okay that the victim was hit by a car. I mean, in fact, the world's better off now because he won't be around to construct negative circumstances for the future generation. Maybe he would have grown up to be another Jake Paul. I don't know.
Yeah, that's
something horrible.
That's my issue with the trolley problem, is that like, what if the one what is it, like one person and two people? Like, what if
five are about to die, but you can flip the lever, which will switch it to the track that has one.
So what if the one person was Martin Luther King Jr.? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. No, I think that's
important.
That's an interesting way to, so you start with just anonymous people, and then you start putting good people in the one, or bad people in the five, or vice versa. In fact, there's a board game called the Trolley Problem Game, and that's basically what it involved. One of my students bought it for me. It was great. And that's basically what it involves, is you just take turns like adding people to the tracks, or like modifiers to the people. And then there's one person who has to decide whether the lever gets pulled or not. And so you're basically trying to make that decision. You're trying to sway that decision in your favor. Anyway, it's great. It's great. Morbid game. It's pretty good.
Which kind of, again, goes into the thing of maybe it's all predetermined. I mean, maybe that we've already made that choice somewhere, and that's just the way it plays out.
That is one of the considerations with the trolley problem, is like, it's a little bit, I don't know. People should be hesitant to just make that decision. Even if you feel like the right thing to do is pull the lever, it should feel a little bit gross to be like, I think this person will be the one to go tonight, or that person. But
so masturbating during that game is frowned upon. Is that what you're telling me?
Typically frowned upon.
Okay, well, that's good.
Most thought experiments, that's usually frowned upon in most thought experiments.
I'm always trying to bring up philosophical questions in the Roman spa. In the bathhouse.
Well, I guess. Well, there is the there are the anti-natalists who think that we shouldn't procreate. So I suppose it could be relevant in some of those thought experiments.
All right, so I don't know how to make this transition, but let's go back into. So the second question was the personal story. Jason's personal story was his view on ignorance versus evil as an American. The whole supporting the troops, don't support war, that sort of thing, the banality of evil. And then John's answer was, how he was raised and how that kept him out of legal issues. So on this question, how did they do?
Yeah, so I think definitely so I would say a point for Jason for casting it in terms of the banality of evil. Which is definitely relevant. But maybe minus half a point for the, I don't know. This kind of is, I think there was some, and this is not a problem with necessarily your discussion, but the issue has kind of this lack of clarity as to what counts as good and bad moral luck. And they came up in the discussion of the soldiers as to what counted as good luck, what counted as bad luck. And I think it gets complicated. Because if you're a soldier, so I think the claim was that ignorance is good luck if you're a soldier, because you're not culpable for what you do, because you're not aware of the evil. And I think that ignorance can be, certainly if you're ignorant of the negative effects of what you're doing, then that can get you off the hook to some extent. But the soldier who, I think it's just, it gets really complicated. That's why it's not like necessarily minus points or anything, but it's really complicated when you're talking about someone who is, on the one hand, they're commanded to do something evil. So that's bad luck, that their commander told them to do something evil because they have to do what their commander says. But the fact that they're not really aware of the full dimensions of it, I guess, that's some good luck. And so, I think I think it can get really complicated when and messy when you're trying to figure out like a particular individual, especially for something like a soldier who's following orders. I think it can kind of cut both ways, and it's hard to sort of make an overall kind of calculation. But the banality of evil, I think, is was kind of a +1. And then on the and John mentioning again the trajectory and some of the childhood experiences. Just looking at my notes here. I do think I think that was a really good application, and the intent. So the mention was about like the strong enough character and intent. And I guess all I would say, and I don't know if this is fair to sort of maybe count this as overall like +0.5 point versus a point, but but your character is part of what Nagel thinks is included in what you're lucky, what makes you lucky, I guess. So the fact that someone is able to resist negative influences or be open to positive influences, or so there's luck as far as what happens to you, which is really important and definitely part of the deal. But even how you respond to what happens to you is also quite a bit dependent upon luck as well. So again, not I wouldn't say there's anything wrong there, but yeah, those would be sort of the pluses and minuses on both sides. So maybe like +1 for Jason, +0.5 for John, I guess maybe.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, these are rough numbers here, but I do think it's it is. This may have come up. I think this came up in this discussion. You were talking about the Nazi example came up several times, but I think I remember there being some sort of a dismissal of the point about the Nazis, because he says someone who was part of the problem in Nazi Germany might have lived a quiet and sort of unassuming and inoffensive life if it hadn't been for the Third Reich. And I guess and then there was a person who got lucky and moved to Argentina for business reasons, right? And so didn't, and then vice versa. All of us who have been lucky enough not to be in an environment that kind of pushes us toward, well, I mean, sure, all of us have sort of experienced it in both directions, but yeah, I guess to me that seems like a pretty compelling reminder and reason to be humble. Like, oh, I look down on people in the US before the Civil War, look down on Germans in Nazi Germany or whatever, but it's good to remember that, well, it's not like I was in that context and I was different. I'd like to think that I would be, and I'm going to believe that I would be until proven otherwise. But I don't. If in any given context the majority of people went along with it, then there's at least an argument to be made that I would have too. Unfortunately, which is uncomfortable. But anyway, so I find those examples compelling. It seems like you all didn't find them as compelling. I'd be curious to hear if that's accurate.
I think my specific issue was with where it says someone who was an blah 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 blah, but might have led a quiet and harmless life if the Nazis had never come to power. Is a pretty the Nazis didn't just disrupt the chill vibes of the Weimar period. You know what I mean? Like that was not really an option. The Nazis came to power because a quiet and harmless life was really not an option. It was sort of
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I think
Yeah.
there's something sort of like naive about that statement, and the same sort of thing about a quiet and harmless life in Argentina as it's being disrupted by anti-communist forces throughout the 60s and 70s and whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Republic, so it's all just very sort of simple, anti-historical. That's my issue with those examples.
Yeah, and that's good because again, sort of what philosophers love to do is just like toss out this like alternative possibility, and they just sort of leave it as an exercise for the reader to make all the necessary adjustments. Because you're right to imagine a world where someone could live through that time period in Germany, a quiet and harmless life. You have to change a lot of stuff, like
1% could.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. But you have to change like a lot of world history to get there. So a world, so it's all about, again, like this is what's fun for philosophers is to like say, okay, let's imagine a world where Hitler never rose to power. And there's fiction and there are TV shows that do well. I guess it's the opposite for the
Right,
TV
yeah.
show, The Man in the High Castle.
Yeah.
But what philosophers like to do is, at least a certain type of philosopher, not all, but those of us with this particular pathology, what we like to do is, okay, how much would you have to change, or actually how little would you have to change so just stipulate that we have a world where Hitler never rises to power. Could you change that just because, maybe he has an accident as a kid and he dies?
His
Or
art career takes off.
You excuse him from conscription in 1917 or whatever, probably on a mental excuse.
yeah. So maybe that's it. And then if that's how it goes, and I think you're probably right. Like, it's not like everything would just be hunky dory. So maybe to get, so Nagel here is kind of like he's sort of leaving a lot unsaid, or he's kind of the sort of like he's just tossing out this possibility, which is pretty radically different from the actuality. And he's just saying like, look, if we can tell a coherent story where Germany is, sort of a stable democracy throughout most of recent history, then, people there would probably not do the sorts of horrific things that they actually did.
I'm just
so there's a bit
curious.
of it. Yeah.
Did Heidegger ever broach this topic?
I don't know. He definitely was I shouldn't say definitely, but my understanding is he was a Nazi sympathizer, Heidegger. He's someone who I haven't, I'm sort of, speaking of ignorance, I'm sort of, I'll confess I'm ignorant, of most of Heidegger's work. And in my case, that's ignorance is bliss. But, I'm, there are people who get a lot of it out of his work, but I'm not. But he was, I think it's fair to say, not a good person. Not that, plenty of philosophers on of various persuasions and stripes were not good people. Probably more than were, unfortunately. But anyway, I don't know if he's I'm not sure if he's saying about moral luck.
I think I would like to do an episode where it's all your favorites are problematic, where we have sort of all the shitty things that Nietzsche said about women. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
Aristotle has a bunch of that. And anyway, yeah, that would be, I mean, it would be, I don't know what the right word, it wouldn't be fun to do that. It would be, but it would be illuminating. It would be an exercise. Oh, we have Heidegger. There you go. Maybe Jason might know more about Heidegger than I do.
Okay. So, that was a joke. That's a comedy prop.
There you go. That's good. That's good. I will say, if he did write about moral luck, then I wouldn't be able to understand it. I think that's what I'd be able to say. Also, I will say, like, Michael Schur recently wrote this book. Oh, sorry. Just one more thing on moral philosophy, and he has like a little dig at Heidegger in there, which I think is pretty funny. But anyway, I'll shut up about Heidegger.
Okay.
Well, he has the Heidegger concept, I think, with respect to moral luck, is that right? We're thrown. That's his concept.
Right. Thrownness. Mm-hmm.
Thrownness, right? We're thrown into these situations, and whether we like it or not, we do things. And then we decide what we think about them.
Yeah,
it's
it would
almost
be interesting.
it's a wire. It's kind of a. I think you get into the realm of dismissing analytic philosophy at a certain point. Well, I think Heidegger would probably dismiss moral luck as a sort of analytic philosophy.
How convenient.
Yes.
Sort of parlor conversation or something.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd be unhappy with Nagel's discussion. And the other guy Nagel was responding to is Bernard Williams. So yeah, Heidegger would be not a fan, I'm sure, of both of them, but they would probably return the favor. So,
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, what good is a philosopher who isn't the only one worth listening to?
that's right. That's right. Got to have our intramural disputes.
All right, so let's go into the question of society. So how does this text play into what's happening in society or the world today? I think they both were just kind of unpacking the submarine story. Jason was talking about how the CEO and the CEO's motivation was making money. John says the CEO was a victim of circumstance, even though it was a circumstance he created.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was a fantastic example, because if things had gone well, I don't know how many trips down there he made. I think it was multiple. And on the other ones, I don't think anybody really knew much about him. Like, and if they did, they'd be like, "Oh, there's some, he's a bit of a jerk, or kind of foolhardy, and he's risking other people's lives." And so we would have various critiques, but nothing nearly as strong as we did in the wake of the collapse. And I think that in some ways that's really nicely parallel. In fact, it's the kind of thing I may, if I get the next time I'm talking about moral luck in a class, I may actually use this, because so I appreciate the timing and the fact that you both brought it up, because it's exactly parallel, right? You have the same amount of recklessness on both. Let's say he did 2 trips. The first trip he was reckless, and he brought people along, and if people who knew about it were probably a little bit troubled, and said, maybe cast some blame on him, and that was it. Second time, you can just imagine the exact same thing, the exact same recklessness, and but because things went a lot worse, we're thinking, and it's weird to, I mean, it is sort of, in some ways it helps, in some ways it complicates things, that he was part of it, and went down with the ship. But I think it is a really excellent illustration of this exact issue, because we wouldn't be nearly as critical of him if things hadn't gone so badly.
Yeah,
but
that's a dilemma in sociology too, is you don't really look at a person's actions retroactively until they've done the bad thing. So it's like, if this tragedy hadn't occurred, how much longer would this have continued to happen?
Right. And maybe he would have done 6 trips and been done, and then would have ridden off into the sunset. Nobody would have known better. But instead it went badly, and now there's a lot of blame going around. And and again, I don't know enough about the details to know whether, like, maybe he didn't take as many precautions this time down, but we can just imagine that he did, and that what caused the problem was something external, like a pedestrian. Not to blame the pedestrian, but some additional factor. And so I think it's fantastic. So yeah, so I was kind of, because that was such a good example, I was hoping that and John had discussion of that too. I was kind of hoping for like a different example from John, but on the other hand, he didn't, he went second, so it's a little bit of a harder ask. So no docking of points for that. But the 2 examples I thought were both really excellent were the submersible, and then also the fact that Facebook contributed to some extent to Trump being elected. That's in a sense bad moral luck for Mark Zuckerberg, or for all the the various engineers, or whoever was involved in making that possible. So I think that's another example too, is that if on the thing that was under their control was just trying to steal everyone's attention and sell everyone's data, which is bad enough, but the sort of endangering American democracy is worse, and that part was out of their control. So both of those examples, I think, are really excellent examples of bad moral luck, which is, here are people who are blameworthy for something, but a lot of the blame, in this case, I guess they're well, if you the punishment sort of was a natural consequence in the first case, and then hasn't been much punishment for Zuckerberg. But the blame, the majority of the blame traces back to factors that were outside of the control of the individual. So those are both really excellent examples of moral luck. And then I think this was in discussion of that same question, just sort of a kind of a quibble, or there's some complaints about the discussion of like our natural reaction or our natural assessment. If you remember that.
That was Jason brought that up. He didn't like the word natural.
Yeah. And so I think, and this could be, I don't know, sort of academic jargon, but my understanding of Nagel there is he wasn't trying to refer to like the laws of nature or the course of nature or Mother Nature. He was just saying it's another word, that jargony word, is like intuitive. I think the point was that we find ourselves reacting in this way and it's a natural result, natural in the statistical sense, I guess, or just in the sense that most people do it and it doesn't feel weird when we do it. And sure, there are probably scientific and empirical explanations, and it's kind of a subtle point, but it wasn't an appeal to nature. He was just saying, look, it's natural for us to react in this way, where he just meant it's sort of a common thing. I guess common would be a synonym there that would mean the same thing, roughly the same thing, but without the, he was trying to just point out the kind of commonality and the universal, or the sort of shared behavioral reaction, I guess, as opposed to it being sort of tracing back to nature per se. I don't know if that makes sense, but that was a quibble I was going to make with the discussion.
I wanted to say it's probably my poor choice of the word nature, because it's for lack of a better word, though. I mean, I don't remember the exact context of that conversation, but even in this conversation, a thing that I've been resisting bringing up and using the word nature for here is the intersection. Like in the pedestrian example, no matter how we change the pedestrian or the negligence of the driver, the intersection is treated as though it is a naturally occurring phenomenon, and that there's just no world in which there are not cars and sidewalks that intersect, and that is a natural thing and not a sort of deliberate social pressure to make people behave one way or the other. And this, to support car culture in this case, but whatever, I'm not trying to dial too hard on the exact example, but in this, there's always some natural element. And I assume I was, existentially, if you want, always complicating where someone is behaving as though something isn't a choice, but it's just a naturally occurring sort of thing, which there is no such thing as a naturally occurring thing.
Yeah, how does one natural in an unnatural world sort of thing?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. And I guess what's going on here, and this is part of this is like a method, Nagel's operating with a certain method that is useful in certain ways, but certainly is open to critique in other ways. And the method basically just kind of holds fixed. I mean, I've talked about thought experiments. It's just like a lab experiment where you hold fixed certain variables and then adjust other ones. And so, yeah, he's just holding fixed, all of the social design and the fact that there are intersections and that pedestrians are regularly in danger and at risk of being run over. And so he's not saying of all the blame that could possibly be distributed, it all goes to the driver in this case. He's just saying whatever is left, if you look at the, all the blame that could go around, tracing all the way back into recorded history. And so sort of going back as far as you want, going out and up as far as you want. So like maximum, who can we blame for this in the sort of like, God's eye perspective? He's just saying all right, let's hold fixed all of the outside, or all of the stuff going back and going out, and let's just sort of narrow our focus, zoom in on this one driver, and whatever portion of the total blame goes to him, it's a lot higher if there's a pedestrian there. And so it's certainly, he's certainly just taking it for granted that he's taking the social design, the context kind of for granted. And and that could be, there are lots of contexts where you wouldn't want to do that. But he's trying to isolate, this one individual and the extent to which what's going on is under his control. And I think certainly you could tell stories where the design of, the urban design almost like nudges people toward bad behavior or toward injury. So there are certainly, that's sort of I would describe that as sort of like an important but adjacent discussion. And so he is trying to sort of hold fixed these things. And if you adjust some of those elements of the context, then you would end up with less blame overall, but there's still going to be part of it that attaches to the driver. And that's just what Nagel's talking about, is that part that attaches to the driver.
But I guess what I take issue with, though, is the point of, instead of just by saying, well, it's the pedestrian's fault, but it's the driver's fault, but it's the civil engineer's fault, but it's the mayor's fault, but it's God's fault. Where you decide you can stop is power, and I guess, and so I take issue with this idea of deriving morality from where you've decided to stop,
I think that,
as opposed to just recognizing power.
yeah, I think that's the whole, that's the moral luck of the situation, maybe. At least
right. Well, that's it. Where you're trying to. I think you're smuggling in power and disguised as providence. Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, Nagel he's kind of silent about providence and about power and about the social design and dynamics. So he's ignoring them. Which is not, always a good thing. But I guess, it seems to me like it's kind of like, little modules, or I don't know, Lego bricks or whatever. You can sort of fill in the outside stuff however you want. And you're still going to have variability sort of in the center of the picture. And yeah, so he is calling it specifically moral luck. So he's kind of presupposing some morality, but it would be a problem if you use this example to try to, I don't know, to try to make a point about how a certain social class was sort of to blame for various societal ills or whatever. That would be a problem, but he's not doing that. He's just, and maybe it's a problem that the example is sort of, silent with respect to those issues. But he is trying to just isolate and focus on whatever, because you could take this individual and this reckless driver, this drunk driver, you can tell the story where he's, pick any society that has cars, and you can just put him in that society and tell the story in the same. It would go slightly differently, but it could still involve some drinking, some driving, a pedestrian or not.
He could be like the janitor at the rich kids' school, and the pedestrian is one of the rich kids who spits on him or whatever.
That's true. Sure, yeah, but I guess it still seems as though what Nagel wants is like this slight change to the story to make a huge difference to how we, naturally or typically feel about the case or about the person. And I think you can get it's true. You can fill in the details in ways that make the story a lot more compelling or a lot more uncomfortable, or there's ways you can tell the story. But what Nagel wants to say is just if you sort of switch in and if you swap in and swap out this pedestrian, which in most cases would be a pretty minimal change, then you get this radical difference in the way we typically think about a case like this.
This is why we don't have flying cars. Because
Yeah, that would be a whole, I know.
philosophical conundrums behind
That's right.
vehicles in the air. All right,
That's right.
so I want to go to John's example of the scientist that masturbated the dolphin. Who had the good and bad moral luck in that example?
I've actually heard that, is it Radio Lab or This American Life or Freakonomics? Anyway, some podcast talks about that example.
I
So
think I know that the Dollop. I don't know if you listen to the Dollop, but it's two comedians, and
they talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dave Anthony and a comedian.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't thought about the moral luck in that situation. You know, I guess, yeah. I think there is maybe there's something unlucky about getting an assignment where you're, spending 24/7 with a dolphin.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify that it was a male scientist who set up the experiment. It was just the female scientist that was responsible for doing the thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the male scientist was a cuckold then. Is that dolphin cuckold maybe?
He was just following orders, John.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
There you go.
It was a sub.
A duckold? Yeah, there's definitely lots of moral, there's some blame to go around. There's some unluckiness to go around.
I feel worse for the dolphin, actually.
Yeah, I don't know if that was a good or bad experience for the dolphin. It's hard to say. There's I hope everybody turned out okay in the end, but there's definitely...
not to burst anyone's bubble when it comes to dolphin love stories ending, happily ever after. The dolphin actually got really depressed after the breakup and wouldn't eat, and I think eventually it died, right, or was euthanized.
Yeah, I think he killed himself by not eating anymore. I think that's how it ended. Yeah,
dolphin hunger strike. Yeah, that's I'm gonna have to do some more work on that before I'm ready to bring that up in class. Let's put it that way.
All right. So question 4, our final question is when and why. Jason guessed this was written in the 80s and that it was expanding on what Kant had written. And then John said he believed it was written in the 60s and that Kant was being revisited in order to poke holes and change views.
Yeah, no, good. One question first. There was a Duran Duran reference in there. I couldn't quite pick up on that. I'm curious to hear more about the.
The cover of the Rio album?
I know the song. I guess I don't know the cover.
It is a very popular art form in the 80s where it's a completely white-skinned, very graphic woman. Basically the same woman over and over again. And anyway,
I see.
You would see it. If you've ever seen the movie, Patrick Bateman murder guy, American Psycho.
Okay, yeah.
He's got a Nagel painting. It's a very 80s thing.
I see. So there's a Nagel artist. Gotcha.
Is that artist name?
I did see the movie Sing Street, which had a lot of Duran Duran in there, which is fun. Okay, good. No, so this one I think is going to be a wash because it was Nagel wrote this in 1976, and then he revised it and republished it in 1979 in a collection of essays. So closer to the 80s, but if we just go decades, it's a tie. And then the point about kind of questioning the Kantians that John made is a good one because Bernard Williams, who wrote the first article he kind of coined the term moral luck. His article is a little bit harder to understand, a little bit more rambling, even more rambling. And but he definitely was, he was interested in he was kind of pushing back on both Kantianism and utilitarianism, any sort of totalizing or systematizing approach. And so in one sense, this is very much, and of course, Jason was aware of the relevance to Kant as well. But there's a sense in which it was written in this sort of contemporary tradition that was kind of calling into question some of these traditional moral theories. So yeah, 1976 is when it was written, so not too far off. And then I think there were some. This is one other thing that I appreciated was there was some. I think both Jason and John were poking a little bit of fun at the rescue attempt example, which was good because I had reading through that. I'm like, oh yeah, it makes sense. Like someone who tries to rescue someone is a hero if they succeed, but then yeah, it's a fair point. Like I can't picture a rescue attempt that involves accidentally throwing someone out of a window or whatever. Maybe there. I guess you could imagine a maybe it's like this. You have the trampoline at the bottom, the firefighter trampoline at the bottom, and you have to like toss someone out. And I guess if you miss, then that would be the bad moral luck. Although I guess there's also the example in The Incredibles when he saves the guy's life, but the guy sues him because he didn't want his life to be saved. And to another example, speaking of movie examples, is Magnolia. If you ever saw that, the sort of there's this scene where a guy jumps off of a building to commit suicide, but there happens to be netting on like the second or third floor because of some painting or something, and so he wouldn't have died. But as he's passing the ninth floor window, a shotgun blast goes off and hits him in the chest and kills him. Right. And then as it turns out, so spoiler alert, as it turns out, what happened was I think a wife was threatening her husband. No, it was vice versa. A husband was threatening his wife with a shotgun and it went off accidentally. Didn't hit her, but it hit the guy. But normally the shotgun wasn't loaded, and it was the couple's son who loaded it. But it was also the son who's the one who jumped off, who committed suicide. So anyway, so I guess the ruling was homicide, and he was guilty of his own death. Anyway, movie examples. It's a fun one. There's a little clip of it to watch, but anyway, yeah. So I appreciated.
Well, that's some really bad moral luck, right?
Yeah. That's there's a lot of luck, bad and good, kind of cutting across in many ways. How do you sort of assign blame there? Hard to say. But I appreciated the recognition that a lot of times these examples and these thought experiments are a little bit thin, a little bit sort of, they're just kind of dashed off to make a point, and they could be told a little bit, a little more sophisticated way.
We're accustomed to digging into like completely mundane things, hoping to God there's a joke somewhere. So like scrutinizing the possibility to change any little word or make some little pun desperately.
Right. Yeah, which I love. I love that. I love that impulse for sure.
So you said there was a clear winner here.
Yeah, so I think the final tally would be so I think maybe like 3.5 to 2, something like that, in favor of Jason, or maybe 3 to 2. So
nice.
Yeah, I think Jason took the win on this one, although it was it was neck and neck for a while, but then Jason pulled away toward the end. So
yeah, the drive.
Good work.
Gave it the away at the end.
But I really enjoyed the discussion. And I'm always happy when someone's willing to dig into, someone like Thomas Nagel, not exactly a bestseller, not exactly, cracking the top 100 on Amazon. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you for supplying us with this read. And and then Jason and I, we talked on another episode about the grandfather problem. So
good.
Maybe you can help us with that one too.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite thought experiments of all time. So free will, time travel, all about that.
Oh, right. I was like, what?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Jason, John, do you guys have anything you want to plug or talk about?
Oh, no. Thanks for letting John go first and all that.
John?
It's great fun. Thanks for having me on. This is honestly one of the more fun projects I've ever done with people that, are not in the comedy community, and it's really thought stimulating. So it was definitely something that I enjoyed. You guys can always check out my podcast, Potential Problems Podcast. We talk about a lot of pop culture. Anyway, it's always a lot of fun. So if you guys get a chance, a couple of reels you can watch that are out there on YouTube's and stuff like that, on Instagram. So if you get a chance, just listen to a video or find us on YouTube.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate everybody's time here. And
Yeah, thanks to you all for sure. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your night.
Take care.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.
Bye.